Looks like everybody's joining us. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started with just a little bit of an interactive activity here. If you would jump in the chat, let us know where you're located and kind of what sparked your interest in joining today's session. We are talking about virtually unstoppable leadership in the digital age. So if you would just take a second, join us in chat and let us know where you're from today. My partner in crime for the professional development team was not able to join us today, but Dr. Rhonda Blackburn is my co-chair as we work through professional development. Not only do we look at the bite-sized learning webinars like today, but we look at a variety of different professional learning options that we have through TxDLA, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. I'm Dr. Kelly Irwin. Again, I am co-chair for professional development here with TxDLA. I've had a background in education and the finance industry in my past, and so really excited for today's bite-sized learning webinar. I will tell you that, excuse me, we do these on a monthly basis. They are free webinars. On the TxDLA website, you are able to find out all sorts of information about the bite-sized learning under the Learn tab, and you'll find our upcoming webinars. And again, I'll kind of mention those shortly as we go through the process. Today's focus is on leadership in the digital age, and we'll be chatting with Nikki in just a minute as she shares some more information with us. I will go ahead and give a shout out to our next bite-sized learning webinar, which will be March 12th. They're always at noon Central Time, so you can kind of bookmark your calendar and visit the TxDLA website to learn more about each of the sessions that we have upcoming. The one for March is going to be kind of giving a sneak peek to some of the sessions that we have planned for our conference, which leads me into the next thing, Leap to the Future. This is our annual conference. We do have a face-to-face version in Denton, Texas this year, March 30th through April 2nd. The virtual session is April 22nd through 23rd. I will give you a little tip. We are still in the early bird time frame for getting registered for the conference. So you have about 9 more days left. If you want to catch a little bit of a break on the pricing to attend the conference. It does include a year-long membership with TxDLA as well as a great opportunity for learning. For today's session, we are recording it. As I mentioned earlier, the chat is open and available. Please jump in and let us know where you have joined us from. All attendees will stay on mute during the session, but definitely feel free to add questions for Nikki that you might have along the way into the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as we go. And now, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you all to Nikki England, and we're going to be talking about virtually unstoppable leadership in the digital age. So Nikki, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nikki England. I've lived in Texas for the past 10 years, but I most recently moved back to Tennessee. You listen to me talk for about 3 minutes and you figure out that I don't hail from Austin, but I am from a town of about 900 people, halfway between Nashville and Knoxville is what I like to tell people. And my background is small town girl. Obviously, I didn't have access to a big university, so I started my education at a technical college, and I actually practiced respiratory therapy full time for 5 years. And then started, I told Kelly earlier, my first kind of education gig was writing curriculum for a technical college, and I could barely spell that word, let alone know what it means. But I made it through. There was a lot of Googling. And I actually sought accreditation for a respiratory program, and then have been in upper level leadership for about the past 15 years of my education life. Most of us post-COVID have joined a world where we are doing things virtually, we're doing things remote, we're operating full teams, full businesses in a virtual space. And I will tell you that as a campus level operator for many, many years, I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder about operating in a virtual space. And it took a couple of years to convince myself that this was not going away. It was something that I was going to have to embrace. And the hardest part for me was figuring out how to lead people the same way that I could build a connection face to face, building that connection in a virtual world. And a couple of years later, I am now convinced that you absolutely can do leadership very, very well in a virtual space, and it can actually lead to, you know, some of the soft things, better work-life balance, things like that for your employees and for your organization, more importantly for our students. That's what really turned the corner for me, was forcing me to figure this out on the employer side with my staff so that we could deliver flexibility to students and help them be successful with their full lives, specifically post-COVID. So I want to start by talking about a couple of fundamental things. And I always say this when I'm lecturing about leadership: there is nothing groundbreaking that I'm going to say to you today. There is no new terminology. There are no new concepts. You can read a book that was written 75 years ago and read that same material today, and you will find concepts and philosophies that are exactly the same. But I do think that it is vital to any organization, to anybody in a position of leadership, wanting to be in a position of leadership, or even on a team at all. I think it is vital to spend intentional time in leadership content, whatever that looks like, because it reminds us of those fundamental attributes that make someone a good boss, a good teammate, a good parent. I do a lot of parables between our personal lives and our work lives. Little personal background: I don't have children, I don't have a husband. I have been career focused most of my life, and that works for me, and I'm happy there. But I have kind of taken a lot of flack, I guess, if you will, for being all work. And believe me, I'm not all work. If some of you on here know me personally, they know better than that. Don't catch me on Friday night in downtown Austin. But the fact is, we spend a lot of our lives at work with our colleagues. And I think it's very important that we are able to create a healthy balance and that we feel fulfilled at work. And when we clock out at the end of the day, we did something for society. And this is selfish. This is all selfish. It's because I want to feel good about what I accomplished that day. But there's a ripple effect to that. And that's why leadership is my passion. It always will be. And it makes me cry every time, because you have an unbelievable influence on the world when you learn leadership well. And I'm a lucky girl. I had some very good examples in my life. Both of my parents are wonderful household leaders. Neither one of them, my mom actually went to college way later in life, but they didn't go to college. They're good people, right? And they taught me those fundamental concepts. So as we're going through my slides today, I'll pop up my slideshow from time to time. I want you to think through these fundamental concepts. And if you have a team of your own, if you are on a team, think through intentionally how you show up in the world with these concepts every day. I talk about human transactions a lot. Every morning when you get up and your feet hit the floor, if you live with other human beings, you're going to start a transaction with a human being first thing in the morning, right? What's that transaction look like? When you go to work, if you're not in a virtual space, if you're hybrid, whatever, or if you're in Zoom, what does that transaction look like? And it is the goal of leadership is to make those human transactions, our interactions throughout the day, as positive yet effective as possible. I'm going to talk about the hard parts, because good leadership also takes into consideration the hard parts of leadership. It's pretty easy to be a good leader when things are going well. That's not a new concept. Everybody knows that, right? But it is how you behave when there's a challenge on the horizon that truly determines how far along you are in your leadership journey in terms of being where you want to be. And I tell everyone all the time, I am no expert. I've been at this a long time. If you look at my resume, you might think that you know, somebody's been at the executive level for so many years, but the truth is we are all learning every single day how to be a better human and how to be better at our jobs and how to get the most out of our transactions with human beings. I will spend the rest of my life working on my skill set as a leader. I will never be there. I never want to come from a place where I'm sitting in front of you people talking about, please, I make the same mistakes everybody else makes every week. But what I do try to do is intentionally go back to those mistakes and do my best to patch those up and move forward and not do that again, right? So I want to talk first to you about virtual culture. Culture is a big word. It's a buzzword in leadership. It's a buzzword at work. Certainly over the past 5, 6, 7 years. What is virtual culture? If you're the boss, if you're a supervisor, if you are on a team, what is the vibe? That's a new word. Look at me. I have teenage nieces and nephews. What's the vibe of your team's culture? What does that mean? Basically, what I'm talking about is how it feels to be at work every day. Do you have the Sunday scaries? I think we all do. Come on, let's call a spade a spade. I wish I were independently wealthy. I'm not. I have to clock in, right? What does it feel like when I clock in, when I get to work, when I start my task? What does it feel like when I get in my first Zoom session with my team or my supervisor and that team? What do those things feel like? Am I happy there? Virtual culture. What is the culture of your virtual, the realm of your job? What is the culture of your students' classroom that you lead as a faculty member? What is the culture of your department if you're in admissions? What is the culture of your department if you're in student services? So I think at my level, I have not been student facing for many years. I am a graduate. I'm a student of a technical college, went through to my master's degree. So all of us on here understand what a student experience is. And we spend a lot of time talking about that student experience. But what I want to focus on today is our employee experience. What is the experience that our employees have when they work for us? As a new employee, as a year to 3 years. And then those employees after 3 years, that's a long time to be somewhere these days, right? I always say I've had 3 big girl jobs my whole life. There's a reason for that. I don't like change. There's so much change in our everyday lives at our current jobs. It's a lot for me to go through that change. And for me personally, I feel like I can be a better leader if I can master the skill set where I'm at. But do your employees, what is their experience? The employee experience. That's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to start with onboarding. I have only been with 3 companies, but I've worked with hundreds and thousands of employees that come from other companies, and they have certain expectations, just like we all do from any relationship in our past. We come into a new relationship with certain expectations. What does that look like? What's it going to be here? Some employers do a killer job of onboarding. They provide materials. They provide a schedule. They give you people to connect you with. They do those things, right? But also, has anybody been given a job and a laptop and some logins and there you go? Of course you have. We all have, right? And you're like, Lord help me, let me get logged in here. Where's the IT person's number? So what does onboarding look like for your role? And here's the kicker. If you're a supervisor, if you're a leader, onboarding is not your company's problem. I know your company should have onboarding. Yes, but guess who that employee's looking at? If you hired that employee, that onboarding is on you. If your company doesn't have resources and you don't have the capacity to get them to build you those resources, they don't have the funding, whatever, there's a million reasons, right? You as the leader need to determine what is my culture for my employee experience that works for me. Folks, this is your legacy. This is not Southern Careers Institute legacy. This is not McAllen Career. This is not the University of Texas's legacy. This is your legacy as an individual. So oftentimes I've had to build onboarding materials. Those are my materials. I'm not going to give those to the University of Texas, right? I will if they pay me for them. I'm just kidding. But anyway, Onboarding, super important. What is your onboarding schedule? Are you nurturing that employee while they're in the hiring process? Very important. I know this sounds crazy. I literally have a calendar, and twice a week while an employee is in the onboarding session, they haven't started yet. They've quit their other job. They're waiting on this job. That's sometimes a 30-day, 45-day turnaround, depending on the position. What's my nurturing calendar for that employee? You nurture your students, right? What is my nurturing calendar for that employee? Very important. I'm not just going to aggravate them to death to be texting them. Hey, how you feeling? Did you get my email this week? Is there anything I can do for you? I actually have a number of nurturing items I send to an employee during that period, whether it's the calendar, the start calendar for the semesters, the quarters, whatever you're on, or it's the vacation calendar. It's information about their insurance that I got from HR. Whatever makes sense in your space, there should be a system that you use as a leader for onboarding, both hard skill. How do I operate all these systems? How do I get into what do I need to actually do tasks for my job? And soft skill. How do we start building those relationships? Because we're not going to see each other in the employee kitchen at the office, quite possibly. I will say that if it's possible, I do like at least one meeting where we do get to meet face to face before the hiring process. It's not always necessary depending on the role. It's not always necessary depending on the organization, but if it's possible, I do like to slide that in. But onboarding is very impactful, guys. It can make an employee feel, number one, fear, because we all have bills to pay. We all need our job to be secure. We've quit a job to take another job. So I want to take care of that part of that person. And then I want them to feel welcome. I want them to feel a part of my culture. And I want them to feel prepared that they can start making a difference and understanding what that difference looks like. All of us in a new role, it's going to take 30, 60, 90, 6 months to actually be positively contributing to your team. But as a leader, you have to figure out, how do I get this person to feel like they're making an impact very quickly? That's up to you. That's up to your role. If your company has formal onboarding, that's great. Big part of leadership to me. Training. What does ongoing training look like? There's lots and lots of virtual training in an online space, depending on someone's learning style, depending on the vibe of the department, depending on the time we have. But I always like to incorporate interdepartmental training as well. Even if it's just once a month, we get on a call and I hear the gal in student services talk to me about her week, or I hear the person in admissions talking about the new applications we're getting for students. What's it looking like? What's our age demographic? Those things. All of that's intentional. You don't ever want to waste anybody's time. I hate meetings for the sake of meetings, especially in a virtual space. I do not want to be, we're strapped to this computer enough. My hip flexors hurt. I'm sure yours do too. So what is the agenda? What does that look like? But it's important. Ongoing training. Once you have someone onboarded, what does ongoing training look like? It could be as simple as a quarterly town hall for your department, where whoever the leader is shows up, gives some general information about the direction of the department, the direction of the university, the college, whatever. And then individual leaders and their departments sharing information. One of the most impactful things that I have found in terms of leadership, especially in the virtual space, is making sure that each department has some sort of transaction with the other departments. I think in a way, sometimes I say this a lot, my background, if you looked it up, it's a lot of technical colleges, very different. I get that than a university, but we all have the same departments, right? So admissions, when they enroll students, they have a certain goal, right? That team has a certain goal. We want our population to stay up at all of our places of employment for obvious reasons. Again, I always go back to, we got bills to pay, right? But then we've got a student services, we've got a faculty, we've got education departments, then we've got some sort of finance department, and then we've got some sort of on the back end career services, job placement, all of those things. I know every organization has a million other departments, but it's important from an operational level that we understand how those things work together to create the best student experience possible and the best employee experience possible. How do we feel connected to one another in a virtual space? I'm going to say some things right here that might be frowned upon. I am huge. We don't know each other, so it's okay. You don't have your cameras off. I get it, right? But if we work together, if we were at the same job, if you were my partner, if you were my teammate, I am huge on camera on. Don't cringe, don't throw things at me. I know, but the research shows that camera on matters. If it is someone you've worked with for 10 years, who cares, right? Get your bed head on, put your sweatshirt on. No one cares. Common sense, people, okay? But again, when my other team, I worked with those people 10 years, I don't even look at half of them half the day, right? So I'm not saying it is dire straits important in every meeting. I don't want to torture people, but it's cool to see what color my hair is. Do I look like you expected me to look? I don't know. You get what I'm saying, right? You can get to know people a little bit better if you can read their body language. Again, this is not mind-boggling information, folks. It's 101 people development, leadership. Do I feel connected to you? I think the number one way to do that is to spend time together face to face. You learn my personality. I learn yours. We're talking over each other in a Zoom platform and a Teams platform anyway. It's a little easier to navigate those things. Feeling connected. Who's read the research? I know you have. There's tons of research post-COVID in particular about employees need to feel connected at work. I don't know if you remember back in the day, we were not really allowed to have friends at work. That was a thing. I think that the baby boomer era, my aunt was a CFO, Lord have mercy. She's talked to me about my hair and my nails and my accent for years. And I'm like, leave me alone. You're in finance. I'm in education. But her generation and that workforce's generation has nothing to do with her age. That workforce's generation had very different rules of engagement than we have now. If you do the research shows that tenure of an employee, you can't find good numbers, solid data. It's about 50% of people say that they will stay in a place of employment longer if they feel like they have close friends. That statistic actually goes up if they say they have a best friend at work. Everybody can say amen because you know it's true, especially with your younger generation. All they care about is feeling connected to other human beings. Not all they care about, but it's a big piece of it. But even at my age, I want to feel connected to my humans at work because we're in this together. Work hurts. All of you, I don't know, some of you may not have been through this yet, but work hurts. Work can damage your little soul. You've got to have people that you can navigate that with. So friends at work. Obviously, there's lines. I can do a whole other lecture on how you're the boss and how you create the right kind of relationship with your staff and you don't blur the lines. There's a fine line. It can be done. I'm convinced of it. You're right, Kelly. Connection is so important no matter what. And even if it's not something that you feel like you're allowed to say, you want that. We all do. Nobody wants to come to work and work with a bunch of people that they don't feel connected to. What about a mentor program? That word to me is kind of dated. I don't love it. I'm trying to come up with some better concept to call that, but mentorship's important. Back when I was in college, it was, you've got to find a mentor. You've got to find a mentor. I actually felt kind of stressed out. Like if I don't have a mentor, I'm not going to have a career. I'm surely going to have to work at Burger King for the rest of my life. Like I was like so stressed out about finding this mentor, but as a leader, you can do that for your teammates, right? All this has happened for everybody, especially those faculty members. You make sure that you partner your less senior staff with your senior staff. That's mentorship, right? A new person comes on your team. You can't do everything. It's impossible. As the leader, you're going to have somebody step in and help mentor that person. Mentorship at work is so important. Here's the thing. If you're the boss, people aren't going to like you all the time. And I don't want to say that so generically, but it's true. If you're doing your job the right way, you're going to have to hurt somebody's feelings from time to time or point something out that's not going so great. Good parents do the same thing, right? Remember that connection from how we behave in our personal lives to how we behave at work? It's the same human fundamental skills, right? If you're doing parenting the right way, if you're doing leadership the right way, you are going to come across a time where you have to say some things that aren't completely positive to someone else. And you can do that in such a way once you have the right relationship that doesn't damage that relationship. So, how do leaders ensure that their virtual culture is what they want it to be? It's very simple. Your transactions are intentional. You show up every day the way that you want them to see you, and you create a system. I'm huge on systems. I always tell my campus presidents that you should be like a gerbil in a wheel. Whether you're running on a semester or a quarter or a mod, whatever educational system you're in, there is a system for which you do the tasks in your roles. Every employee on your team, we all have those systems, right? But we typically focus on the task driven systems and not the leadership driven systems. They're two things. I'm going to share an old concept. I think you probably remember this. Back in the day, you had to pick whether you were a leader, a manager, a coach, or a trainer. Like that was a thing in some of the content, that the leadership content. You really need to be all of those things. To be a great leader, you have to have the ability to train. You have to have the ability to coach. You have to have the ability to manage. Those are different things. All four of those concepts are very different things, which is why I told you at the beginning of this talk, I will never be there in terms of being a great leader, because it's impossible to master all four of those things. But you can be intentional about thinking through how you're going to behave with all of those four attributes and how you're going to teach your team to do the same thing. What about fun stuff in a virtual space? Has anybody been on those calls where the chit chat's going like for 15, 20, 30 minutes at the beginning, and you haven't gone to the bathroom in 3 hours, and you certainly didn't get to eat breakfast, and you're like, this is great and all. I really love hearing about Brenda's grandchildren, but we got to get off this call. It's important that we take time for those things, because we unintentionally get those things if we're in an office space, right? If I run to the restroom, I run to the employee kitchen, I'm going to run into my employees. I'm going to see those people. We're going to have those conversations without meaning to. In a virtual space, you can go for days and weeks without getting into those little chit chat things that are very important. So, I mean, old school, we would have called it an icebreaker. Typically, you don't need to do that. Typically, there's a Nikki or somebody that gets on the call that says something about something, and people start talking about their weekend. Those things are important. We all have different personalities and different styles. I have a best friend who doesn't want to hear any of that ever. So you just have to take into consideration, let's keep it to a minimum so that we don't go over time on these calls, but it's an important part of what we need to do to be in a virtual space together. I want to go back just a minute to basic leadership and the word influence. The word influence is pretty powerful. As a faculty member, as a supervisor, as a leader of your department, the basis of your job is to influence people to do certain things, right? You got to influence your students to do the work you're asking them to do. You have to influence your employees to do the work you're asking them to do. How do you influence people? The number one way to influence people is to be the person you're asking them to be. Has anybody had a supervisor that told you to do all kinds of things all the time? They're really good at pointing out what you need to do, but you didn't feel that same culture coming from them? It's very simple. Just be the person you're asking them to be. Leading by example still matters 100% of the time. And so when you're talking about influence and making a difference in a leadership environment, it starts with your own personal behaviors and who you show up as in the world, what your transactions look like with your employees. So a couple of pet peeves, these are just things that I like to mention. If we are in a virtual space, the meetings should all have a purpose. Obviously, this is not new information. I haven't done the research in the past few years. Most of you probably know this better than me, but the adult learner can only absorb information for so many minutes at a time, right? Yet they trap us on meetings that are an hour, 2 hours. That sometimes is necessary. We're working on giant reports. It's just part of it. But we should be mindful of the amount of time that we are expecting employees to be productive and effective in a virtual meeting. But if we're there together, there really should be no multitasking unless it's a part of the meeting and unless it's been talked about. I'll give you an example. I had a partner that I worked with that I desperately needed this person to help me problem solve a couple of things. And I had this one-on-one every single week with this person. And I had my agenda and I could not move forward with my tasks until that person either gave me the go-ahead, some advice, something. And about half the time, that person, camera on every time, because it was just our culture. We just did that as an organization. But half the time the person was on their phone texting. I mean, I can see it. It's like this right here, right? Like in front of me, not looking at me in the camera, swiveling in their chair. Those tiny little things are huge, especially when we're talking about a supervisor and their employees. So be very mindful. I had a director of education once when I was a campus president, and she was having a really hard time connecting with her faculty. And of course, as work has it, the faculty would come to me every now and again to tell me, they were having a struggle with her. And the biggest piece of what it was that she wouldn't stop typing and look at them when they walked in the room. Everyone knows how that feels. Everybody in this Zoom channel knows how that feels. She wouldn't stop typing and look at them when they come in the room. And there are times when, yes, she had a deadline, but what we worked through, I literally had to put Post-its on her screen that said stop typing and look up, because she was just she had been a taskmaster her whole career, found herself in a position of leadership, and truly didn't understand those tiny little things and how they were damaging her leadership legacy. So we worked through that. And I still do this very thing today. If I am in a Zoom channel, 99% of the time it's going to be with a team I've worked with for years, doing tasks we've done forever. If I need to multitask, I will announce that. I'm like, I'm listening. I need to finish the spreadsheet. If it's not a call where I need to be 100% involved, I just let them know. Like, I don't understand. I think we got away from being transparent for whatever reason. Like, I see you. I know you're typing on your keyboard and looking at another screen. That's cool, especially if it's one of those calls where it's not your turn or it doesn't directly impact you. You're just kind of there to be filled in. Just make those announcements. The other thing that I want to talk about is every now and again, you'll get in a Zoom call and a Teams call, Google Meet, and somebody wants to talk the whole time about things that aren't even necessarily relevant to the call we're on. Lord help us. I have had to work on this with myself. I'm not there yet. I thankfully stumbled upon an executive level employee that I worked with for years that was desperately bad at this. And I thought to myself, oh my Lord, is that what I look like? So it taught me to keep it quiet unless I had something valuable. There's a fine line, because you want to provide input. I need your input as the supervisor. I want it. I want to hear what my employees have to say about certain things, but just being intentional about when you add to a conversation in a virtual space matters, because again, it's about time and efficiency. Yes, we owe our employers 8 hours a day. Absolutely. Whatever your schedule is, you owe them 8 hours a day. But we all want to be efficient and use our time wisely. So make sure that you are giving thought to when you speak or when you're called upon. Concise, valuable information is best. And then if you want to follow up with more content via email, I think that's great. The other little weird tidbit that I'm going to give here, is a lot of times it depends on whether you're talking to what industry you're talking to, whether it's a male or a female. I had worked for female bosses my entire career, and then all of a sudden had a male boss. And I thought he hated my guts. The first 6 months was really difficult for me. He would not respond to an email. Like, I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. Turns out the way that I had learned to operate with my female bosses, we communicated very well via email. They answered my emails, they responded, they read all the words that I sent. Turns out my sales-minded male boss did not think that way. So it put me in a situation, thank goodness, I had a male mentor to talk to about that. And he was like, Nikki's not going to read those emails. They're way too long. He's not going to read that. Like, he doesn't absorb information the same way you do. That's not necessarily a male female thing, I've learned. It's a personality kind of which department you work in kind of thing. But I had to learn that. Who am I communicating with and how do they like to absorb information? So it taught me to pick up the phone and ask when I had questions. But for that employee, I can't email him. To this day, I don't email him. I pick the phone up and we talk. So just learning, even in a virtual space, it is not always the right thing to do to send emails. Chats can get lost. I love chat bots and chat rooms, whatever you guys use we use Slack at one of my clients. I love those for day-to-day operations, but real information can get caught because there's so many people on those channels. I know you've all had that happen. So, and then somebody gets mad because, well, I put that in Slack. Okay, come on now. Slack's not formal communication, right? Instant messaging is not formal. That's for task-driven things. If it's something that really matters, you probably want to take that level of communication to something like an email or a phone call. The other thing I want to mention about the virtual space, and I know this might be controversial as well, but you already heard me talk about the cameras and how vitally important that is. But I have found not the higher level that you get to, you don't see this quite as often. But I've found that oftentimes with students in particular, and then entry level employees or entry level leaders, they don't get up and get ready for work every day. Let me explain myself, right? You've seen the memes on social media that are making fun of work from home employees. 8:58, this is me, like my hair's in rollers and I'm like in a robe, and then 9 o'clock, I'm sitting at my computer. I had to learn this lesson the hard way, even for myself. I'm a big, do my hair and makeup kind of girl, whatever. That's not the point, but I have two different Nikki's. I learned to be one person in my house to keep my stress level down and to not think about work. And I'm a different person when I'm at work. Back in the day, we used to use last names. So it was Nikki and then it was Miss England. And in my household, I'm a different person. I don't have my suit jacket on. I'm clearly in my house shoes. It's a different vibe. And when COVID first happened, that was the first time in my life that I had worked from home. I really struggled, really struggled for probably 3 months with figuring out how to be honest, be my best. Because when I flipped into that campus door and I was Miss England, it was easy for me. I didn't have to think about it. I was at work. That's who I am. I'm Miss England. But when I walked from my bedroom to the other bedroom to go to my office, I was still Nikki. And I had to figure out, how do I transition myself in my own home from being Nikki to Miss England? And a part of that for me was two things: getting ready. I still have yoga pants on, for the record, but I do throw a suit jacket on. I'm not standing up. They're Under Armour and turquoise, but I do throw a suit jacket on just to feel more at work, right? And all of the things you've already researched, but they matter. And I've also learned to incorporate those things, some sort of module about how to do that thank you, Miss Hudson. Yes, how to do that every single day. Because look, wait, I gotta show you. I'm wearing pink Birkenstocks, right? I have a sequin suit coat, pink Birkenstocks. It's a balance, folks, right? So, but these are things you got to teach your new employees. They have grown up, again, entry level, different than probably everybody I'm talking to here, right? But if you are in a position of leadership, you're dealing with these people, and oh, I love a Burke, but they just have to know these things. And if they want to be successful, I've even gone so far as to ask some open-ended questions in the interviewing process about their work from home thoughts, just to get them talking to me about how they view that. Those of you who live in Austin, what is that, Salt Lick, the big huge barbecue place out there? One Saturday of my life, me and a bunch of I'm a CrossFitter, so I have a lot of friends that are in their 20s and 30s. I am not. We go to this barbecue place. We're out there listening to the band. We're having a great time. They all work from home. We get in this conversation because somebody shows a picture of her laying in the bed with her dog snuggling, and it's like 2 p.m. And her husband says, "This is her. I don't even know why her company pays her." Woo! My blood pressure went up. I was torn to shreds. I was like, "You people are going to ruin work from home for everybody." And we had this hour-long debate about what that looks like, and just the tips and trades. But getting up in the morning, having a routine, figuring out how to go from being Nikki to Miss England, figuring out how not to feel like the laundry in the laundry room is going to eat you alive when you couldn't even think about that laundry if you're going into the office, right? That's a Nikki problem, not a Miss England problem. And Miss England's clocked in right now. Okay. So anyway, I have one more slide left. We're going to talk about how leading virtually. I want to end with the big topics. What really matters? Number one thing, what really matters is your virtual culture. How do I stay connected to these people without driving everybody crazy and meeting for no reason? You got to have a system. Takes time to work out that system. A big mistake that I have dealt with in my professional career that I'm sure has happened to all of you is organizations are really good at coming up with the system, but then when it doesn't work, we don't go back to the drawing board really quickly. That's a big problem. So come up with your system. If it doesn't work, if it seems inefficient, if this call might not be necessary, if we could do these 2 calls in this 1 call, let's do that. You got to, what's your system? What's your cadence of operation with your department, right? Often not listening. Yep. I don't like that either. Like most of us have outcomes based jobs. Some people have task management, deadlines they have to hit. Kelly, to your point, I was that supervisor. I was smart enough not to verbalize it, but I was that employee that was scared to death that my employees weren't working. Now, I've been very fortunate when you're leading executives or middle management, upper, you don't really have to worry about those things. But when you have different age groups and different levels of employees, sometimes those things can be a problem. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, what I figured out is we all have outcome-based jobs. They expect us to perform and produce something, regardless of whether that's curriculum, whether that's a number of audits, whether that's a number of, student survey responses. We all have outcomes we're expected to produce. As long as my employee is engaged appropriately and those outcomes are there, honestly, I could care less, right? And I normally go to the 20-60-20 kind of spread mathematically for what you can expect out of your employees. 20% of your employees are going to be A players at all times. They've been there, they've done that. You don't even have to talk to them all week. They're going to produce their outcomes. They're happy. They might want to chit chat with you and complain about Sally in student services once a week. I don't know. Work venting, that's a tidbit I'm going to end on. But generally speaking, 20% of your employees are going to be A employees. You don't have to worry about them. 60% of your employees are going to be B plus players. You love them. You're not gonna, they don't want to be leaders. They don't want to be the president of the university, which is great news. We can't all be the boss, right? They are support staff. They want to clock in. They want to do their job. They're pleasant. They're good employees. I want that 60%. That's very, very important. Very important part of your team is that stable 60%. And then you're always going to have 20% that we call the C players. There's probably a more appropriate name for that. But here's the kicker. New employees are C players. They don't mean to be. It's not their fault. Until an employee knows their job, they're going to be in that bottom 20% of producers for you. That's just a fact, right? So 20% of your employees, A players, 60% are going to be that real stable, good employee that basically run our companies every day. And then you're going to have that group down there you're continually training or coaching. So virtual culture. It's understanding how to manage those buckets of employees. What do I do with these A people? What do I do with my good, solid 60% staff? And what do I do with these people that are either new or having a challenge? That right there is the key to leadership. How do I handle those 3 buckets of people? How do I get those 3 buckets of people to interact positively with one another? It can be done. It starts with building your system. What does that look like? Take it back to the drawing board. Don't do what upper level leadership has done every now and again in all of our careers. Ask your employees, Kelly, how do you feel about this? How do you feel like our weekly meetings are going? I have learned every job I have ever had from an employee. There's a young lady on this screen right now that taught me career services. I didn't know anything about student placement. She worked for me. She taught me because she was an employee of mine. She taught me how career services runs and student internships and things like that. I have never been afraid to learn from my employees. Number one, people want to tell you what they know, right? That makes everybody feel good. But number two, it creates a different level of relationship with you and that person. Fix your system, figure out what that looks like, go to your employees, talk about those things as a team. Are we operating well in our systems management to create the culture that we want? Last thing, follow up and follow through. I can't stress it enough. I told you I wasn't going to tell you anything that's mind-boggling today, but I'm telling you things that really matter to everybody all the time. Follow up and follow through. It gets difficult to do that when you're in a job that you have to rely on other people to finish pieces of your job. I get that, but your ability as a leader to follow up and follow through with whether it was a challenger employee, I need help with this, can you help me? You can never forget to close that transaction. You can never forget. Every single time that you forget to close a transaction, guess what happens to that relationship? Same thing that happens in our personal lives. You start losing a little bit of trust with that human being, right? So follow up and follow through. You got to develop yourself a system. I certainly realize that not all of us have the same personality attributes that are going to lend themselves to being that person. You got to figure it out, whether it's a post-it note system, whether it's a fancy Excel spreadsheet, whether it's Google, whatever you want to do, you got to follow up and follow through. In particular, in a virtual world, your employees may or may not reach back out to you again, but I promise you those transactions that you don't close, they're going into this person's DNA and they're creating an experience for them that may not be the experience you want them to have as a leader. I can't stress enough the power of routine when it comes to leading in a virtual environment. You got to sprinkle in those fun things. You got to sprinkle in, Lord have mercy, Sandra, did you get your hair done this weekend? Tell me about that baby's ball game. You got to sprinkle those things in. We're human beings. That's what I care about, right? I got to make money to pay my bills. We have things we need to accomplish, but I want to know what Paula did this weekend. Tell me about going to Vegas. Like, that helps us create a human connection to one another, and that's not a bad thing, folks. The very last thing I want to mention is proper workplace venting. I think this is a point of contingency for a lot of leaders, depending on who trained them, how they were trained. I'm a big fan of workplace venting if done appropriately to the appropriate people. It is going to happen. Your spouses complain about you, maybe in their own heads if they're smart, but it's going to happen. You have to teach your employees, and God forbid yourself, to do that in an appropriate manner. Guess how I learned that lesson? The hard way. I had a supervisor that I did not like, and we had vastly different styles of leadership, and I did not handle that well. And thank God that I had a mentor that jerked me up and said, little girl, you work for him, not the other way around. You have two choices. You find a way to make this work that's healthy, or you leave the organization. That's rough, but he was right. Right? That's rough, but he was right. And I decided I like my job and I'm going to find a way to work this out. And I was fortunate enough to have a supervisor that I could have a very open conversation with. But I figured out how to vent appropriately. And my mentor, bless his heart, he became the person I vented to. So I think he probably still regrets that conversation to this day. But too bad, so sad. Anyway, workplace venting. It's got to be appropriate. I teach that to new employees because I just mention it, right? Because it can damage your culture really, really badly. And those tiny little transactions that happen that go unclosed really make a difference in the employee's experience. That's all I had for you today. I hope that you take away one thing. to think about the employee experience in the same way we think about the student experience. The negative always spreads faster. Yes, ma'am. And my kind of rule of thumb for that is if I hear it once, I log it. I log it to my brain. I think through it. And then if it starts to grow legs and it's in your gut that it's a problem, and you need to address it, right? Normally, again, one time I'll log it. Maybe I'll do some digging if I need to, but that stuff has to be addressed. That's the hard part about being a leader. Takeaway for today, employee experience. What is my experience as an employee? If it's not great, can I talk to my team or my supervisor about that? And if I'm the boss, if I'm the supervisor, if I'm the leader, how do my employees feel? What's their experience as a team? Kelly, should we open for questions, or how does this part of it work? I'd love any feedback as well. That would be great. Anybody had anything to add?
Absolutely. We didn't have any questions show up in the chat, which is completely fine. We don't always have questions pop up. But yeah, does anybody, before we sort of do the final wrap up, we have about 8 minutes left. Anybody like to come off mute, come on video, and ask any specific questions to Nikki? Not seeing anybody unmute. I will say, oh, yes, I agree. Insight and recap on leadership skills was awesome. So, Nikki, I will say that you kept saying you're not going to tell us anything that's like earth-shattering or that we don't know. But the thing that I appreciated the most about this session is the reminders that weren't earth-shattering, right? I mean, I felt myself many times like jotting notes on my little notebook or making comments in the chat because these are just good things to remember. This was a fantastic session for me. I loved it. Paula, I think you were off mute while I was talking. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask or a comment?
It wasn't a question, it's just more of a comment. I really like how she put on the transactions and talked about the transactions and the importance of them. It made me think of a person that she was very knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable in her line of work. But when you would communicate with her, she wouldn't answer like in 2, 3, sometimes she wouldn't even answer at all. And people started losing confidence in her and trusting her. And it was just because of her lack of communication. And it's important to see how you have to have in mind that, okay, you can be the best worker, you can have the best knowledge, but if you don't communicate, then that's not, it doesn't work. It's not gonna matter. And it doesn't even work with us anymore because of that.
That's exactly right, Paula. Thank you so much. You mentioned one word that's my favorite word, and the reason that I switched my major from medicine to education is that the real thing that we do every day is help people build confidence. That's what leadership's about. That's what student development's about. And a leader that doesn't have the right skill set can take confidence away from employees. And to me, there's no greater infraction in life. There's no greater infraction than making someone feel a little bit less than they felt when they clocked in this morning. So thank you for that insight, Paula. I really appreciate that. You're exactly right. Thank you for using the word transaction. It's true. Every morning we get up and we have thousands of transactions with humans.
Excellent. Anybody else? We probably have time for one more question or one more share out. Does anybody have anything before we move on? Not seeing anybody come off of mute. Okay, great. Nikki, I want to say thank you. This was a fantastic session. I am so excited that you were able to join us and talk about leadership in the digital age. It is different and not different all at the same time. You know, leadership is leadership, but you gave us some fantastic tips along the way and things to remember. So thank you very much for that. I'll give everybody a quick reminder. Again, there's all sorts of information on the TxDLA website. On our membership page, you can sign up and register. And the great thing about that is then you have access to all of our past webinars, from recordings, information from conference. If you go to the TxDLA website and you look at the Learn section. That's where you're going to find out information about the upcoming bite-sized learning webinars. We would not be able to do any of the things that we do without our amazing partners. So I'll just leave this up as I talk about this and just do a quick shout out and thank you to all of our partners. Notice that we don't really say sponsors, because that's not really how we look at the vendors that work with us. They truly do partner with us to bring experiences and information to the members of TxDLA. They are very much a part of who we are and what we do. So shout out to them. Quick reminder about our in-person and our virtual conference. Again, if you will register before the 21st, there is an early bird discount. We look forward to hopefully seeing you in person, and if not, definitely virtually, for a great experience for learning and leaping into the future. As I mentioned, joining TxDLA is easy to do on the website. It is $50 for the year. Again, if you register and attend conference, your membership for the year is included there as well. We have all sorts of socials. Please, find us, follow us for all of the latest and greatest information. Again, Nikki, thank you so much for today's session. I hope everybody enjoyed it and you all have a fantastic afternoon. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.